Hello and welcome to this Lunar Society podcast. My name's David Clark, and in this edition of In Conversation, we talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities facing the hospice movement in the UK. Today we're at Birmingham St Mary's Hospice in Selly Oak that provides hospice care across Birmingham and neighbouring Sandwell. And we're in conversation with Tina Swani, the hospice's chief executive, a role she's held since 2001. Tina is also chair of, now take a deep breath, Birmingham and Sandwell Sustainability and Transformation Plan End-of-Life Care Oversight Group. That's a long title for a very big job. Now, first of all, Tina, congratulations, because Birmingham St Mary's Hospice is celebrating its 40th anniversary. Tell us about those early days and the founder.
Oh, Monica Pearce was our founder, and I regard her as a truly revolutionary, inspiring woman. To be a matron of the General Hospital and to conceive the idea of putting the Midlands' first hospice into reality is an absolute example that we all should follow. And I think we learn from the heritage of our past that will help us to be as revolutionary as we need to be in our future.
And what about her beliefs and values? Do those still hold true? What was it that drove Monica Pearce?
Monica Pearce was a woman of faith. She was of the Catholic faith. She really believed in being there for everyone, whatever their faith, whatever their background, whatever their culture, and whether they had a faith in the same form as a religion or not. And so those values about being here, because we're very much a multicultural city now, those values hold true now. So we aren't a religious organisation. We believe in what is important and what matters to every single individual. And that was what was revolutionary about the modern hospice movement, being the first modern hospice in the Midlands. It really turned around the idea of caring for the dying, which is quite a depersonalised approach to regarding every individual, no matter how long they've got to live, as an individual whose situation was different, whose family circumstances were different, and enabling them to have the best quality of life until they die, and right through that process of death and dying.
And the site you're on now, I think, is it still the same site that Monica Pearce started on?
It is. It's exactly the same site. It was on a peppercorn rent from the Archdiocese, although in their Year of Mercy in 2017 they gifted us the freehold, which means that if we need to adapt or change the building, we're doing that and we're adding value to the charity.
Right, okay. But I mean, the bulk of your work now, actually, and the support you give, is not actually within this physical building in which we're sitting today, is it? It's out in the community.
Thank you for raising that, David, because it's a myth that a hospice is a place where you go to die. Most of the care we provide, 400 people a day are under the care of Birmingham St Mary's Hospice, and most of those people are receiving care in their own homes, in their own home environment. And that's what matters to many people. One of the challenges, though, is that across Birmingham, Solihull and Sandwell, out of those individuals that die every year, 50% are dying in hospital. And many of them have got conditions that hospice care could support to be more supported in their own home environment.
Yes. I mean, I did want to talk about that because if we go back 40 years, I mean, the environment then was totally different, wasn't it, I guess? It's always struck me there's a bit of a stigma, there's a reluctance to talk about, the end of one's life, the end of anybody's life, actually. And I guess 40 years ago, that was even more so, actually, in terms of discussing those kind of issues. I mean, it seems so often that we plan for virtually every eventuality in life, apart from that one that we know is going to happen, and we just try and avoid it. How do we overcome that as a society in terms of having those discussions about how we look after ourselves and each other as we come towards the closing days?
I think that's part of going back to our roots in society, when many years ago death and dying was very much part of the community. Our founders were very, very focused on enabling very natural conversations about death and dying and what matters most at that stage of life and thinking ahead about what we all want for the future, how we would want to be treated if we didn't have our capacity, if we were reaching the end of life, makes a difference to how you plan life right now. So part of those values of the past about compassion, conversations about what matters most, about collaborating, and really about being in the heart of the community are those values that we're taking forward today. So we work very closely with many communities across, the diverse communities of Birmingham and Sandwell, and we learn from communities about how they have those conversations about death and dying, and many have got a lot that they can teach us as well.
I mean, how does it differ, especially in an area like Birmingham and Sandwell, then, with such a diverse population and so many different faiths as well? How does it differ? Because, I mean, this comes from the Catholic, originally the Catholic faith, but now you're in Sparkbrook, for instance,
Yes.
and so on, so you've got different communities.
Yeah.
How does it differ across the city?
I think the biggest thing is, rather than try and generalise about individual communities, it really comes down to each individual person and regarding each person as an individual. So everybody will have their faith. Everybody may, some people may have no faith. And I think human beings naturally want to survive, so may not want to face death. There can be some taboos in some cultures that talking about death might bring on death, but you sometimes find that when you talk to individuals can feel like that too. I talk to my own children about power of attorney, what will happen if I get closer to death. At first my lads were saying, look, don't you think this might be tempting fate? So I said, well, let's have a contingency plan in case I'm not immortal. And it's finding ways into those conversations. Yes. And if it starts with the family and those that are closest to you, I think that cuts through the cultural barriers. And it's really listening to individuals about how they feel as the starting point, and how they broach conversations about death and dying gives us more to learn.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading an article in which somebody was quoted as saying, talking about dying won't actually kill you.
No,
but it does seem actually it's quite a challenge though, to it. But I suppose the other aspect as well, and you talked about the amount of work you're doing, and you're looking after 400 in any one day, plus of course all their families as well. But the pressure's on you as more of us, I suppose, express a view that maybe we'd prefer not to be dying in hospital. We'd prefer to be dying at home, or maybe in the care of a hospice itself. And at the recent Lunar Society event, there was talk of about a 40% or thereabouts increase in referrals.
Oh yes.
How do you cope with this kind of demand?
Well, we have had a 40% increase in the number of people that we see on an annual basis since this time 3 years ago. So over that 3 years, referrals have grown by over 40%. Now, when hospice care is involved in someone's life, the story is quite different, because more people are enabled to have the support they need to live out their lives in their place of choice. And that's very significant. How we coped with that increase in referrals, I put it down to two things, because most of our funding, we're a charity. We have about 36% funding from the NHS through contracts, but the rest, in our almost £9 million turnover, comes from the generosity of the public. So we've raised funds and we've increased staffing to meet growing demand, but the demand, the population, is going to grow even more, especially in the older age groups, and we're celebrating people are living longer with multitude of conditions, and so hospice care is going to be needed more than ever now. So how are we coping with that? We're working a lot more with partners, so that we're sharing that expertise. Last year we educated 1,700 health and social care professionals. We educate we teach palliative care to all the students, medical students at University of Birmingham. We're now working with Aston University's new medical school. We do nurse placements for Birmingham City University. So we're developing the workforce and helping to grow the workforce by educating more health and social care professionals, including our programme of education to care homes, so that more people can deliver hospice type care, and the reliance won't be so great on the services we provide.
Right, I understand. So there are two aspects there, aren't there? There's the clinical care, the medical care, but there's also that very human care and support that you get within a hospice as well. The medical care, I mean, clearly that is for the doctors and the nurses, but you believe, do you, that others can sort of assimilate the
very much so. I mean, all our, if you speak to our doctors, nurses, volunteers, they share the same compassion, the same goals to support every individual that we care for. And also, this is where working with communities is really important, because if you can build the strength around each individual, if their support network is supported, so if carers are well supported, because there are more ageing carers now, there are people like me that are called the sandwich generation, because we've got grandchildren and elderly parents.
Yeah.
So if people like me are well supported, if we're caring for young and old, so it's carer support that's really important as well.
Yes.
And that comes with support from the local community. So if we can work more cohesively with communities to support people who are caring for others, then that also builds the strength around each individual, so that they're more resilient, able to be more independent for longer, and perhaps less reliant on professional support.
Yes.
So it's growing that compassion. I mean, really, Birmingham, there are pockets of Birmingham that really demonstrate that we are a compassionate city, and I think there's a growing movement across Birmingham, across leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, people in health and social care, that we really need to bond together and work more closely together to truly be a compassionate city.
Of course, you work with the NHS, but you're not part of the NHS, and that is true generally, I think, of the hospice movement in the UK, isn't it? It's not a part of the NHS. Is there a day when it will become a part, or do you prefer to be, as I think probably the RNLI, for instance, again funded through public support and not by government, prefer to be separate to it, actually, because they say we can control our own destiny? Is there an element there that you can be a part of, but also apart from?
I think
the NHS?
If the NHS was going to give us more money, I'd take it. I'll tell you, even if it was 100% funding, because there is so much more demand out there. So we have to think of ways of meeting that demand in partnership. I feel it's really, really important. I think there's some enlightenment within the NHS now to embrace the work of charities. We have been on the periphery in the past, and we're now being brought more into the fold. The NHS is prepared to allow charities to take a lead because they recognise our expertise, and I think it's learning through those partnerships that will truly transform and improve the life of people as they live with an illness towards end of life.
Now, what about your work with other hospices? Because I think I'm right in saying there are about 22 other hospices in the West Midlands. And clearly you all got expertise within there. How do you cooperate with each other? And are there greater benefits to be had from cooperation?
Oh, well, on next Tuesday we've got a meeting of all those Midlands, the Greater West Midlands hospices. So we do meet up on a quarterly basis, share challenges, look at how we can work more effectively together at a regional level. We work very closely with our neighbouring hospices, and even looking at how we can join up services. Because the future workforce is going to be a challenge. Health and social care workforce isn't growing at the same pace as demand. So we've had, for instance, recruitment events with other hospices and staffing shared across hospices. Our medical director, for instance, was doing sessions on a regular basis at another hospice when they needed that support. So it's very positive to have that synergy of hospices. And I always say that it's far better to work in collaboration than in competition. And if you are working in collaboration, you're stronger if the wrong sort of competition tries to enter, because the private sector has tried to enter the NHS and charity domains, and sometimes that has worked well, but at other times, because a profit is needed out of it, then it's meant that if the profit hasn't been made, then they've actually found that they can't sustain that work. So it's really important that charities and statutory sector and private companies work together in collaboration for the common good. A bit like our company works, our charity works with your company, David.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And that kind of relationship is, helpful all round,
yes.
I think. I noticed that when I came into reception as well, there's also a sign saying research. Just tell me what's all that about?
Well, in 2014, we set up our research team, and that's in collaboration with the University of Birmingham. We have one of their research team working with our research leads. And research really helps you to be at the forefront of what works best, because palliative care, which is about enabling someone to live the best possible life with complex multiple illnesses, is something that is fairly young in its development compared to other specialities. So we were very proud recently to be awarded a research award by the National Institute of Health Research for being the most research active hospice. And one of the reasons we won that award was because we have research champions throughout the hospice, so we make it very much part of what we do. It's also a way of patients and families who want to give back, so being part of a research programme and a research trial. Some of our staff felt a bit protective of patients, but they all have a choice. They're not all involved in research, but those that do get involved say they really want to be part of progressing hospice care for the future, because they've benefited so much from it. So it's a very, very important part of the work we do that we want to take into the future.
Yes, it's a different sort of legacy in effect, isn't it actually? Yes.
It is. It keeps us developing and being right at the forefront of palliative care.
We're here marking the 40th anniversary of Birmingham St Mary's Hospice. I won't ask you to get the crystal ball out and go quite 40 years hence, but the next decade, how do you think things might change? Next decade, 20 years, how do you think things might change and develop?
I think really our next 5 years will be about sharing excellence. We don't want it to be an iceberg of excellence on its own. We want the thread of hospice care to reach through communities and other health and social care professionals, because if everybody had the same approach of hospice care, and it doesn't necessarily take time, it takes an attitude and it takes an approach and it takes a preparedness of treating an individual as a person rather than a condition. Those sorts of things don't necessarily take time. So that approach, if threaded through the whole of hospice care, and we listen well to our communities at all levels of our communities, I really see that as being the next revolution of hospice care, because it's a much more joined up, integrated, shared approach to hospice care, because it means hospice care for all and delivered by all.
And that really sums up Monica Pearce's approach, wasn't it?
It was.
Which is a really fitting way to finish this discussion.
We haven't quite got there yet, but
No.
we're determined to get there in the future.
Right. Tina Swani, thank you very much
Thank
indeed
you.
for your time. And congratulations on your 40th anniversary for the hospice. Thank you.
Thank you.